Hey guys, welcome to the Himprovement podcast, where young men get the help to develop their character, identity, and mindset in order to activate their potential and achieve their goals in life. Today's special guest is Zack Rutledge, who is a personal trainer, nutrition specialist, and a certified brain health trainer through the Functional Aging Institute. He also has a black belt in karate and has practiced yoga for almost a decade. Welcome to the show, Zack.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor, and I love what you do. I think it's great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm really excited for today. And so I guess before we hop in, what's some information that you like for the audience to know about you?
Well, everything you said was pretty great. I appreciate it. I'm actually finishing up a yoga teacher certification in about 6 weeks. So that's pretty cool too. So all of that as well, which is pretty fun. But I guess the other big one, which is really the reason I guess you're having me on, is that I wrote a book about depression. It's called The Official Depression Relief Playbook. And I really wrote it for, I wrote it for anybody really suffering with depression. But my main target, it sounds funny, but my main target was me when I was 20 years old. So I guess in a way you could say it's for younger people, right?
Right.
Because that's when I hit like my deepest points of depression. It's really a story of everything that I used to get out of it. It's all the tools that I had acquired over a decade, and it goes pretty deep. So yeah, so that's the big thing I've been doing lately.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into that actually, because this is something that's extremely, I guess, stigmatized, if that's even a word, especially among guys, where when it comes to like mental health and that sort of stuff, and especially depression, it's not really something that's acknowledged, I'll say. And also for those that do acknowledge it, it's kind of seen as a weakness in a way, for a man, especially like with traditional expectations and things. But if anything, I would say that it's actually a strength whenever you can face it head on, and then you have the fortitude to take your own actions, which you formulated in your book, to fight it. And after that, having the strength to be able to share your story and provide that information to other young men and women that might be able to get help from that.
Yeah, I completely agree that, it has been stigmatized. Luckily, I do think things are changing now, thankfully, because of people like you and because of, a lot of people, just the internet in general. A lot of people are a lot more willing to talk about it. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, definitely. And so I guess if you don't mind, could you tell your story a little bit? Could you tell what the catalyst was for writing the book, or, maybe some of the events that led up to you getting to that point to where you're in a dark place and then eventually decide to start implementing those tips that you have in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started pretty young. I mean, now that I have the insight, I could see that there were some chemical things going on when I was a kid. Nothing, there were no like capital T traumas or anything like that. It was just kind of like I took breakups harder than normal. Just things that I could recognize now as I wasn't quite functioning the way other people were functioning. I was taking things a lot harder, like I said. But it wasn't until my the summer after high school, my best friend was killed, and that was when things
Oh, wow.
kind of manifested because I was living in basically a perfect storm. So of course that happened, and that was a crushing blow. He's my best friend from the time I was 5 years old. Um, but on top of that, my karate school closed, so that was tough. And then, it was 2 weeks before all of my friends left for college, so that was happening. And then there tends to be this pattern where quirks, let's say, pick up in those late teens, early 20s. So things like depression and OCD, things like that, tend to kind of manifest around those years. So it felt like everything kind of hit me all at once. That was the bottom, and that was really tough.
So it sounds like, I guess some of the things that contributed to it, of course, with your friend dying, is that also you had a lot of different changes in your environment, with school not being around anymore. And then that support group, I guess you could say, that you would normally have of your friends, they all kind of were gone. They weren't able to be there for you. Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly. And this is before social media. This is a while ago.
Before
So,
Facebook, all that. Yeah.
I mean, this stuff existed, but not like it does today.
Okay. Okay.
And so it was tough. And I tried going to college, but I just didn't have the energy to do it. It just wasn't happening. So there was a certain point where I realized that what I was going through wasn't grief anymore, because everyone has to go through grief, and there's no getting around that. And it sounds funny to people who haven't been through depression, but grief almost felt cleaner than the depression. So, after I was 6 months, a year out, I was like, why am I still feeling so low? I mean, obviously, I was upset that my friend was killed, but it was still this just absolutely draining, awful feeling, where it's just like this bottomless pit. It just kept going, going, going. And that's when I realized, okay, now there's an issue. So what I did was, I was like, okay, I'm going to create a plan to get out of this. And it was a very, it was like a brick by brick type thing, which is really, I think, a good way to do it. It's just, I wish people had the tools to do it a little quicker. So I was figuring this out on my own. I didn't have a support system. I didn't have anyone really giving me advice, and I wasn't even reading any books on it. So, and the internet just it wasn't the way that it is now. It wasn't like the go-to to find anything, right? Like it was around, but it just wasn't what it is now.
So wait, just to pause right there.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that I guess I'm kind of following their chronology and everything. And also to kind of interject too, something that you mentioned, I think is extremely important, is you talked about how you said the grief was more bearable than the depression. Am I understanding you correctly?
It was, like I said, it was cleaner, which sounds odd. It was a crushing thing. Absolutely awful to lose your best friend, but it was different. That felt like a mountain I had to climb, but in a way, it seems like that's a mountain that you will get over. We all lose loved ones, and we all eventually get over this awful grief mountain, but we have to go through it. The depression was incessant, and it was different, and it felt dirty, and it sounds strange, but it felt dirty, and it had almost like a color to it. I explained, there's this one short portion in the book where I talk about, I felt like the smell of burning plastic. That's what it felt like, that just nauseating smell of burning plastic. That's kind of what it felt like for a while. So yeah, what I eventually had to do was figure out a way to kind of battle my way back to a quote unquote normal life.
So it kind of sounds like acknowledging it, and I guess accepting the fact that your friend passing away hurt you was something that was a good part of the process, because you talked about how the depression was dirty, but then whenever you actually gave yourself time to grieve, it felt cleaner. Do you think that might have been part of it too?
Yes. Yeah, that's really insightful. Yeah, I think so. I didn't even look at it that way till you just said it. Yeah, absolutely, that was the case.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to ask about that. Just trying to make sure that I'm following along too. But yeah, please continue with the story.
Because and in no way am I, sorry to cut you off. There's a small delay between us, and in no way am I like downplaying traumatic events. Traumatic events are by definition traumatic events. So it's just that it was this compounded thing. So that was kind of how I knew that when nothing was changing a year later, I knew something was up. So anyway, what I did was, I had to drop out of college, and I was spending like vast majority of my day in my bedroom, and I wasn't sleeping well, and I wasn't staying awake well. It was a real tough time. So I said, you know what? I've really got to start sharpening my mind. I've got to be able to focus on something for a half hour. So I said, this sounds silly, but when you're down at the very bottom, I was like, I got to start building myself up, with baby steps. So I said, I'm going to start by watching TV. And I said, okay, what do smart and informed people watch? I was like, I'm going to start watching the news, which is the worst possible thing I could have done, because, with
all the bad stuff on the news, that's probably not going to be the best thing to reinforce positive thoughts, right?
No, and I quickly learned I didn't need to know about every murder in the tri-state area, So I was like, okay, this may not be the way to do it. And it wasn't until I played in bands, and I still play in bands, but it wasn't until I joined another band where these guys were into working out. And I had been fit to an extent, but just as a byproduct of doing karate, things like that.
Right.
But these guys were into lifting weights for the sake of lifting weights. Now, I should provide some context here. today I'm 5'9" and 170 pounds, which is, whatever, nothing to talk about. But I work out 6 days a week, so I really don't have a lot of fat on me, and that's what it is. So that's 170 pounds I am. Cut to back then, still 5'9". I was 124 pounds. So I was almost 50 pounds lighter. Yeah.
Yeah, you put
So
in a lot of work from it, it sounds like.
I put in the work, and I didn't realize how light I had gotten. I had never been this big, but I shouldn't have been that light. And
Right.
it was from the depression, and I was getting sick a lot. And if I had gotten seriously sick, there was nowhere for me to go. I mean, I was skin and bones. So when I started lifting these weights, I went from, the 124, and then pretty quickly I went up to 135, and I could, see the difference in my body, and then up to 145. And I was like, I can see this muscle building on me.
Did it change your mood too?
Absolutely. Changed my mood. It gave me a sense of accomplishment, and it also just gave me something fun to do, a new interest. I remember being in bed and reading like articles on like how much protein should I be having, and what exercises should I be doing to develop my lats, and like things like that. So that was the first effective building block that happened, which is dialing into that physical aspect, which is a lot of the time the first place I put people. And I like to come at it, I call it the D-Day approach, because I come at it with everything, from every single angle. But I like to point at the physical angle first, because it's concrete. It gives you something to do, even if it's not building muscle. If it's going out, let's say for a bike ride or whatever, it's a physical thing that you can do, that you can scratch off of a list, right?
Right.
So that's the first thing I steer people towards is getting their physical house in order, I guess. And then from there, I was like, okay, well, this worked. Maybe I should dial in a few other things. And of course, naturally, next came nutrition. But then from there, again, just brick by brick by brick, eventually developing, routines. And this actually took some bravery, like you said, but like getting other people involved, because I was doing this solo for probably 5 years, and getting other people involved and building a team around me. And I talk about this a little bit in the book. I'm a big believer in therapy. I'm a big believer in getting your doctor involved. I'm a big believer in getting, whoever else you need, because I consider them coaches. They're all part of your team. You're the CEO, but they're all part of your team. And you should use them. You should use them for they have skills that you don't possess. So it was just this very slow but very thorough build back up to now. I'm doing things I never thought I could do. But
Right.
so I just feel like I got to get that word out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And something to kind of add to that too. You had talked about how you have been doing it by yourself for so long, but then whenever you added friends to the mix, it kind of, I guess, created improvements in a way. And I think that that's so important to talk about too, because especially with guys, the gang or the tribe, I guess you have around you, excuse me, quote unquote, can play such a big role in the trajectory of your life and how you even deal with different things that might be going on with you, like depression, for example. And so, let's say if the gang around you is an actual gang, in all likelihood, most of you probably aren't going to make much of yourselves. You're probably going to end up having a rough life, if you even, live a full life, with a lifestyle like that. But surrounding yourself with a positive gang of people who were working out with you, doing positive things and reinforcing good behavior, it made it to where you made a big change in your life, to where you started gaining weight, you started to feel better mentally, all that. And so I think that that's definitely something important to kind of touch on too, because a lot of guys kind of maybe will look at things from the perspective of how they need to be like a lone ranger or something like that. A lot of people do take that kind of approach, I guess you could say, but it just really goes to show how having a support team around you, and I guess you being the CEO, like you said, of your own group, the way that you look at it, and having people around you that, bring something to the table that support that, I guess, your company's mission to go on with that CEO analogy, it definitely does make a difference.
Oh, absolutely. And I could have easily gotten sucked in because I was hanging out with the wrong crowds at that time. When everything really fell apart, I was, like I said, I'm a musician, and they're great musicians. I mean, they're just like regular people, right? But we were out late hours, and you can either be around these guys who are into fitness, or you can be around these other guys that I played in bands with before who were like into drugs and drinking and um, living these not great lifestyles. And I could have easily fallen into that. So I'm really blessed that I got to almost by chance fall into this band of guys who were just so health conscious and positive. I think that's really the key word, because if you have really negative people in your life, you got to really pause and think, what are these people contributing? What are you gaining from these relationships? It helps to really surround yourself with positive people. I'm just reiterating what you said, but I agree.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how it works out. I can just see from how it's worked out in my own life, and then of course you can see yourself. And so that's just something I wanted to bring to the attention of the listeners. For those people that might be checking this podcast out, that might not necessarily be acting intentionally about the connections that they're making and who they're hanging out with, just hanging out with who's convenient, which could be, let's say, old high school friends or whatever else, people that might not even be, in the same type of path that they're going down. And so I feel like if more people were intentional about this sort of thing, then they start to get closer and closer to those results they really want in life. And so it just made me think of that whenever you brought it up. I'm glad that you did.
Absolutely. I'm with you there.
Yeah, but to continue your story, this is really good.
So I should mention this because I tend to forget, but while we're talking about teams and therapy, so like I do talk about this in the book, that I went to a therapist, and this is important. So I went to a therapist not too long after my friend had passed, and I didn't like it. And I thought, okay, that's not for me. I went once and I figured, okay, therapy is not for me. I can laugh about it now because I know how ridiculous that was. I tried again a few years later, and I liked this one guy. It tended to go pretty well. But then a month later, he said he was going to move. So he was, yeah. So like he threw me under the. I mean, he was a nice guy, but I mean, I wish he'd given me a heads up.
Yeah, definitely wasn't very helpful to your situation at the time.
Yeah. Right. So he gave me to his assistant, she was very young, and she was very by the book, and there wasn't much humanity going on. So I stopped again. And it wasn't until I went back to college and I had a psychology professor, and I loved his classes. I was taking classes even though I wasn't getting credit for them, just because I loved the classes so much. And it was at a community college, so I just took the classes for fun. And eventually we got talking, and he had a private practice, so I ended up going to him. And that was such a rich relationship and such a rich experience, that I implore people not to give up, because I can see a lot of people could end up like I was, say, okay, I tried therapy, it wasn't for me. But if you find that right person, you can make so much progress. It's such a valuable thing, such a valuable relationship. Just for a quick example, I learned, I don't know if you know what this is, but the Myers-Briggs test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your personality type?
Right. So I learned I'm an ENFP, which was so just provided so much insight into the way I think, and why I had done certain things. And if any of the listeners haven't taken the test, you can find some online. I think the longer the better, because they can be a little more thorough.
Yeah, and they're free too, usually, I think, right?
A lot of time they're free. Yeah. I took the really big, long one that was like 200 questions. It was on paper.
Wow.
Yeah, I took the legit one. But yeah. So what personality type were you?
I'm actually ESTJ.
ESTJ. Okay, cool. Right on. So yeah, but it gives you like a lot of insight on just the way you think, and it helps out your relationships, like why some people don't understand you and why maybe you don't understand the way they're thinking, right? But then you can kind of be like, oh, so like ENFP, just a quick example, and I'll drop it because I'm fascinated by this stuff, but I know some people aren't. ENFPs tend to be future oriented. So people like me tend to be interested in and talk about the potential of things. So what could be? Like, so there tends to be a lot of entrepreneurs or ENFPs, psychologists or ENFPs, people in like music and like video and music or movies, whatever. Like that tends to be ENFP as well, because you're seeing the potential. You want to build something. But there are personality types where they see what's already in front of them. They're more concrete. So that's a different personality type. So I can understand now why I was having a tough time communicating with certain people. So really valuable stuff. I know I'm geeking out right now. But
It makes sense. It makes sense though. I mean, it's something people should think about.
It is something people should think about, and it's okay. Like, if you can have friends of all different mindsets, right? But you just recognize, oh, they're just wired to think about this a little bit differently, and then you can find their common ground, right? It's fascinating to me, right?
And it can be helpful too.
It's very helpful, very helpful. I mean, that really helped me. So anyway, so that was it. So if you're thinking about going to therapy and you can afford it, if you're lucky enough to have health insurance, or even if you don't, you can find some charity, great organizations out there who can hook you up. But if you're thinking about going, just go, and go until you find someone you can really click with. I think it's great. But at the same time, my primary care doctor, believe it or not, she was a huge influence on me as well. She was amazing. And she was really cool about, she recognized that the decisions were up to me as far as really anything in my life, right? But she's the one who talked me into medication, which is the very last step. I didn't do that until it was literally the last thing I did in my journey. Our journeys never really end, but that was the last thing that felt like I really built myself back up to, fighting weight, however you want to put it. So she, I had believed all these things that, like, once you start medication, you can't stop, and I don't want to feel like a zombie, and all these things out there. And she was like, hey, if you don't like it, just stop. And I was like, oh, okay. It was like, it was so like clean and like simple. I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was an option. That's great. And having her by my side was really helpful too. So if you can get even a primary care doctor who really knows their stuff and is really wants to connect with you, it can be really valuable as well. I mean, she got me on what I take right now, and I'm open about it, and I talk about it in the book. I'm on an SNRI, and you hear a lot about SSRIs, but I'm on an SNRI, slightly different, and that's just because I have like a neck thing that has like nerve pain down my arm, and the SNRI helps kill that nerve pain. Okay, so it's slightly different, and that was actually the thing that pushed me over, because I was having a lot of issues from an injury. They actually give SNRIs to people with fibromyalgia to help them. So it really helped my pain. That's great. But it also really helped with my mood.
Okay. Yeah. I can see that. Yeah. How that could, I guess with that specific situation, how, it ended up like really working for you, especially with the nerve damage and all that. And to kind of interject on this, sorry guys, if you keep hearing me coughing and like clearing my throat, I'm a little bit sick right now. So please bear with me. But to kind of, I guess, relate this to my own experience, where you talked about finding somebody that works for you. I can admit that I've also been to therapy too. I'll say that there have been some, how do I put this, some very painful experiences in my life. And it got to a point to where, I kind of had to put my pride aside because I didn't really know how to deal with some of those situations, especially, as I got older, even during my last year in college when some different things were going on. And so to kind of harp on what you were talking about, something that really helped me was the therapist that actually got assigned. And so it was through the campus. And so I didn't have to like use my insurance or anything. But the thing that was helpful with her was that she wasn't the type, I guess you could say, to really talk a lot or offer opinions. And I don't know, maybe that's like industry standard or something like that. But one thing I will say that she did was help me to be objective. She acknowledged what I had to say and what might have been my anecdotal evidence or, what I thought my experiences were. But she also made sure to, I guess, kind of keep me in check, I guess you could say, to make sure that I'm looking at the situation for what it was. And I would say, even though she didn't really offer a lot of insights or anything, or really any at all, you would think it wouldn't be helpful. But I'll say that just from her being a neutral person that I could talk to without fear of judgment or anything like that, and just to hear myself, I guess, formulate my thoughts and finally put it out there, because I'd never done that before, that alone helped me solve, I guess, the mental, battle that I was fighting, because I eventually ended up solving the problem myself. It kind of got to the point to where I looked at the situation for what it was. I acknowledged what my role had been in it. I acknowledged, how the situation had hurt me and had bothered me. And it got to a point to where I just had to, I guess, tell myself, or I guess make the decision that this wasn't going to be something that I was going to let control my life. And if anything, I was going to come back stronger and actually improve from it and be better. And also it was a lot, I would say it's about 50 to 75% of what inspired me to do this podcast, seeing how personal development and all those things helped me to be able to get through that tough time in my life, and then wanting to provide the same type of help to young men. So I can definitely relate to what you're saying about that, how, even though we might have different personality types and, be looking for different things, once you find somebody that works for you, it really does make a world of difference whenever you get that professional second hand.
I love that you said that, man. I love that you said that. Yeah. And she essentially worked for you as a type of a coach, and there's no shame in having a coach. We get a coach for teaching us how to do any sport better, but when it comes to living our own lives, for some reason we hesitate, right?
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I love that you said that. I think that's great.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to kind of add that in there too, because I felt that like it was really important to, I guess, touch on that, because people listening, they may be dealing with their own struggles or whatever, and they might see people on a podcast and think, oh, these people are so much different from me. They probably don't struggle with the same things I struggle with, have the same problems. I feel like by us both kind of sharing our story somewhat, it gives them, I mean, of course we're human, but, it just more so asserts that, to people that might not know us personally. And it helps them to where, let's say they want to do something like what we do, or pursue some type of dream or goal that they have. They know that there are people who had similar struggles like them that were able to still work with that and rise up from the ashes, I guess you could say, like a phoenix, and get to where they are today. So
I love that you said that. And on a similar note, because this is important as well, I thought for some reason my depression was special. There was no cure. When I was in my deepest parts, I thought I was special. And I'm sure everybody with depression, they're like, oh, well, these people, their depression is not like mine. Their depression is not like mine. And guess what? They're right. Everybody has their own story, but we have one unifying factor. We can all get out of it. And I firmly believe that. We just have to come at it with everything we've got. You just have to commit. One of the things that I thought was fascinating, throughout this whole journey and doing research for the book, I found out that we create 90% of our serotonin in our gut, which is wild. You would think that most of it's in your brain, right? 90% of our serotonin is created in our gut.
Really?
So actually, yeah. So a lot of doctors are actually prescribing probiotics to help treat depression. I believe that's part of the issue. I don't think it's the whole issue. I don't think anything is the whole issue. I don't think there's any one thing that's going to cause depression, just like I don't believe there's one thing that's going to cure all depression. I think it's a multifaceted thing. But yeah, so there's people actually giving probiotics to help cure depression, which is why I have a whole chapter on nutrition in my book. I really think, and people are hesitant, but I really think people should get allergy tested, because, and I point to my back because the way they do it is, and it's not scary, is they put a bunch of like pinpricks in your back, so then they can see like what's going on back there. Yeah, so it's not a big deal, but through that they can tell what's creating like chronic inflammation, and that chronic inflammation that's going to wreak havoc on your gut. You're also going to have that inflammation in your brain, not helping, right? That's another school of thought, is that depression is actually an inflammation issue. So that's why, before we even start dialing in the diet, I would really like people to get an allergy test if they can do it.
That's actually really cool. I've never even heard of that, actually, that you said what 90% of serotonin like comes from your stomach. So I guess what you eat. And so, most people probably don't pay much attention to how their diet or what they're putting in their body can affect their mood. Yeah. And so I'm glad that you brought that up. And so it's really something that I haven't thought about that much, really, to where like if you're eating junk or whatever it is, it might not give you the best serotonin levels, like I don't know, eating what's something healthy, a kale salad. I wouldn't eat that, but something like that would probably would probably give you better results, I would think.
Absolutely. You're totally right. So yeah, so the reason, like when in my private clients, I have them do that first because, and then I always do the same thing. I'll have them do that and then I'll go towards, it's a modified version of the Mediterranean or the low inflammation diet. There's an actual diet called the low inflammation diet. And then we'll just swap out the things that they can't have. Say they're not really, let's say like me, lactose doesn't really agree with me. Like if I have a glass of milk, that's no good, right? So I just cut that out, but I replace it with other things, like whatever. But I try to make it all pretty low inflammation, and it's all pretty healthy. And you may not realize how it affects your mind if you're always drinking soda. I am not kidding you, man. I had a woman. I'm not kidding you, and you're gonna think I'm lying, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. I had a woman.
I'm ready.
Every single night when she went to bed, she brought up a 2-liter bottle of soda and drank it throughout the night. She would wake up in the middle of the night, get thirsty, drink it. Wake up in the middle of the night, drink it. And by the morning, it was gone. So,
whoa.
While she's, yeah.
Wait, it sounds like there's a lot wrong with that. Okay, first and foremost, how can you drink? Well, I wonder, at least, in my experience, how can you drink something with sugar in it at night and find a way to fall asleep? And two, I can't imagine like how much havoc that probably was wreaking on like her body just from drinking a 2-liter every single night. All that sugar, all those calories and everything, like weight gain, sugar crashes like throughout the day, whatever. I can't even think of all. It's not like I'm a nutritionist or anything or like a health guy like you, but I can only imagine.
Yeah, well, you don't need to be, man. You know that it's no good. So for some reason, she was cool with it. And it wasn't until I was like, you know what? Maybe let's not do that. Maybe if you bring up, she didn't like plain water because she was so used to drinking soda. She said it has no flavor. I said,
She
fine.
didn't like water.
She didn't like water.
That's the craziest thing in the world to me when people say that.
And it's surprising, right? But there's a lot of people out there because they're just so used to having sweet things. So I said, fine, grab a little bit of lemon, squeeze it in there, you'll be fine. So she swapped it out. And I think it was about 3 weeks later, she was only drinking the water. And that was the only change we made in her diet, right? It was taking out this soda every night. Saw her 3 weeks later. She's like, I can't believe how much better I feel. I'm sleeping so much better. And I said, really, you can't believe it? I said, look at what you're doing. Now imagine if we swap out some of this other stuff, right? So yeah, I mean, this is just good advice for anybody, right?
Right.
But especially if you have depression, you're going to need to be able to get in some decent sleep, and you're going to need a healthier gut, and you're going to need to try maybe a little harder than some other people to really dial in your physical needs and balances.
Yeah, I think it's great that you brought that up.
Thanks,
yeah. So yeah, I know I keep like distracting you, like taking you off like from your story, but they're just like different things that you're touching on that I really like, and I just wanted to elaborate on. But I know you're talking about diet, and you also talked about finding like the right coach for you. But what were some of the other things in your story that you like to talk about?
Oh, there's a good amount. This one's gonna sound silly, so I'll tell it.
Okay.
This is because I have obviously I talk about quite a bit, but this one is the shortest chapter in the book. It's the one that people kind of laugh at, but it's true. I remember thinking I had just graduated college, and my idea of success was business suit, corporate world, because that's the message we're basically told.
Yeah, I would agree. Same thing with my situation.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, so I guess I'll go for that. I'm out of college, I'll go do that. And I remember putting on a business suit, and I was driving to this interview, and I just busted out crying, just sobbing in my car. I felt so out of place, like I was forcing square peg in a round hole type thing.
Right.
It was so not me. I belong in a non-corporate structure, and I belong in a gym, or I belong in the arts, or I belong in a medical field. I don't belong in corporate America. And guess what? That's okay. And I think a lot of people with depression are trying to force themselves. I think a lot of young people, regardless of whether they have depression or not, are trying to force themselves into this certain idea of success. when there's actually a whole myriad of different paths you can take and be successful. So,
Okay. Okay.
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I would have been way more suited just opening a gym or something like that. And I would have been fulfilled. I would have been happy. And that would have been successful. That would have been great. Um, but forcing myself to this corporate world, you know, it it's um, it's not it's not gonna do you any favors. I mean, and some people that works for them. If they want the corporate world, that's great. But then don't force yourself to open a gym. You know what I mean?
Right.
So so don't and it sounds silly, but you can't force it. And this may actually fall into, you know, I have a chapter on meditation, and I think just kind of when we get into meditation and we kind of check in on who we really are, it's okay to follow that. It's okay to not be a business suit guy. It's okay to not be a corporate guy, or vice versa. It's okay to do that if you want to do that, right? But you
Right.
got,
Right.
and it sounds cliche, but you got to be true to yourself. It really is important.
You know, before we hop into the meditation thing, I just wanted to go back and touch on that.
Yeah.
And so this may not be something that a lot of people put thought into, but you know, there are points in time where people might, you know, get into like a mood of where they're unsatisfied with life, but they may not know why. And I think it's important that you brought that up, because some of these aspects of life that may be leading to them not feeling their best, or, you know, just really not having the energy or being up for doing what they do, is that they may not even realize that the aspects of it might just be the way that they're choosing to live their life. You know, people may see working at corporate job, or, you know, buying the house, having the family is like what you have to do, or, you know, whatever other examples you can think of. And they're kind of trying to fit themselves into a mold that they don't belong to. But since their expectation is that's what has to be done, that's what life is, they may not even realize that it's those expectations that are leading to them not being in their best mental state. And you talked about living a life authentic to yourself. I mean, to yourself. I think that's so key, because I'll say once I started doing that, well, I mean, I haven't been able to do it 100% of the way, because, you know, of course, I'm only 23, and, you know, I haven't done everything I want to do in life yet. I have to plan for that to be able to eventually live 100% authentic life. But I'll say whenever I start to consciously work towards it and do it in every single way that I could control right now, my life became a whole lot more fulfilling. My mood changed, and I became, you know, a much happier person. And for the first time in my life, I stopped having problems falling asleep. You know, it went from me taking like, I'll say 30 minutes to fall asleep finally, to now I lay in bed and I'm ready to knock out. You know, I fall asleep in like 5, 10. And so I think that's really key to you brought that up. And a lot of people don't pay attention to that, because they kind of see it as if that's not an option in a way. And they don't even realize that by them having that defeating attitude of, I can't really do what it is I want to do, that's not reasonable, that's not feasible, that in itself is what's leading to them having maybe that depression, or you know, that negative energy, that low energy whenever they go throughout their day, and some of those other problems that they might be facing.
Absolutely. It's a factor. It's definitely a factor.
But yeah, but not to take away from your story, but
Oh yeah, no. Yeah. So yeah, I mean just checking in and following what works for you, and accepting that you know, it's okay. It's okay that we're not all the same, right? That's a good thing. Um, and I know we mentioned meditation real quick, um, but that's the chapter that I got the most pushback on, as far as people saying, "Oh, well, I just can't meditate." Oh, I
really.
tried. Yeah, a lot of people
So
told
they
me
said they couldn't meditate. That was the pushback. And like, and what else? Or was that the main thing?
that was the main thing. They said that their minds would just go wild. They would think too much. And I said, well, yeah, dude, all of our minds go
And
wild.
that's kind of like what happens when you meditate.
Yeah,
So
yeah. We're human. We're
yeah.
human. So that's gonna happen. So like, so what I try to tell people is, and I give a few different examples of meditation in the book, but what I try to tell people is, it's not the absence of thought. And you're not going to go from never meditating before to being like totally zenned out in 3 sessions. It's a practice. And the way you practice is, when you get into your zone, or however you choose to meditate, there's a bunch of different types. But when your mind starts to drift, pull it back. pull it back to your breath. Let's just say we're focusing on our breath. Okay, I start to think again, pull it back. I start to think again, pull it back. And it's that act of pulling it back. That's the meditation. It's that act of pulling it back. You are making progress there. And what's going to happen is it's not going to be in the first few weeks, but maybe after a little while, you're going to notice you have to pull it back a little less,
Right.
and a little less. So it's just something that you work on, and accept that, yeah, at first that's just part of it. You got to spend the time pulling it back. And as long as you're pulling it back, it's like working a muscle, right? I'm not going to go, do curls with 100 pounds if I've never lifted weights before, right? That would be crazy.
Right.
Same thing. Got to practice slow and low. You start easy, So yeah, that's another one. People just like insist, oh, I can't meditate. That's not for me. Well, ease into it, guys. Ease into it. And like it's like the woman with the diet with the soda, right? That was the first thing. Just cut out that soda at night, and just these small steps, building ourselves up, right? There is no overnight success when it comes to things like this. It's that gradual sharpening the sword, let's say.
Okay. And I think it's good that we touched on this, because for those people that may not be familiar with meditation, probably like those people that had reached out to you and give you the pushback about that chapter, people may think that to meditate successfully, you have to have no thoughts go through your head. And so I think it's great that you brought that up, that that's what's supposed to happen. That's essentially the function of meditation. It's not just being completely just, thoughtless. It's taking that deliberate action to, whenever the thoughts come into your head, push them out to eventually develop that mindfulness and discipline and that focus. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Yeah. And, and spend the time on it. It's something that you got to do pretty much every day. And if you fall off, that's okay too. Just come right back to it. It's your breath is there for you. You can do it anywhere.
Yeah. And so I guess another question I would ask is, when did you finally start to see like a strong defined turnaround to where you knew you had overcome the depression and like the poor mental health that you were dealing with at that time? What do you think was the turning point to where you finally, kind of thought to yourself, I'm able to move on from this and lead a healthy life?
Well, it wasn't like there was one there wasn't one moment where I was like, I'm done, I'm complete, because we're never complete as humans, right?
Right.
As far as like feeling like I really had it handled and I've done everything I can and now I can start teaching, was when I started taking the medication, because I was good and I could have kept going without the medication. I won't lie to you. I could have kept going, but around 8 o'clock at night, every night I would start to get depressed. So I was just like, you know what? I don't deserve this. I don't want to get depressed every single night at 8 o'clock, until I went to bed. So the medication was what did that. And then I haven't, knock on wood, experienced any symptoms since. But the point where I feel like I really crested over and kind of like, in screenwriting, we call it broken the back, right? Like we've gotten past that halfway point and we feel like we can start to get a handle on things. Was I was in grad school, and I was already had my diet and my body dialed in pretty well. And it was that cross between, and I'd started meditation, I'd started yoga, but it was the cross between the challenge of getting a master's degree, which was challenging. It takes a lot of work, right?
Right.
Really applying myself, and then also the things I had to do to become the person who could do that kind of work. Meaning, I had to start reading self-help books, and people, get a little cringy when it comes to that, or they tend to make fun of that, or they dismiss it. I completely disagree. I think it's great if you see somebody in the self-help section in a bookstore or in a library. They're trying to work on themselves and make themselves better. I don't know what's a better reason to be at a bookstore or a library. So when
I agree. Honestly, I don't really see a point reading anything else.
I think it's great. I think it's amazing, and I don't. I think the stigma comes from like, oh, that person's in the self-help section, they must be broken, right? It's just like the stigma of going to therapy. Oh, that person must be broken. No, they're seeking out these things that are really going to help them. So I love it. So yeah, so it was this really discovering a lot of this self-help stuff, self-improvement stuff, and going for this challenge of grad school. And that's where I was like, okay, I've got like a good amount of this under control, and I'm really seeing how my um like intake, like my media intake affects me.
Yeah,
Because
how it affected your output.
yeah, because I was so busy, I had to cut out the news, and I had to cut out, man, I'm really beating up the news today. I had to cut out, like, any of the junk, like, even like fluffy, like fun things. I had to cut out a lot of it because I was like, you know what, I want to do something that's going to help me. So I was doing a lot of, a lot of like inspirational things, a lot of inspirational videos, reading a lot of inspirational books. And it just, I just learned so much in such a short amount of time. I'm a big proponent of those as well.
Interesting how uh, the self-improvement, the personal development is the thing that you talked about that really helped you to get through it, And so if that doesn't prove that this content, the stuff that we talk about on this podcast is valuable, I don't know what will. And to kind of clarify what I was saying earlier, what I meant by, I think that's really the only thing you should read. I think that you should, if you're going to be reading books and things like that, of course, I guess it's cool to read, entertainment type books here and there, like fiction, if that's what you like to do.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the most value that I've gotten from reading has been from personal development books, kind of like in that self-help area, like what you're talking about. And to kind of, I guess, refine what that means, we're talking about books like Think and Grow Rich, How to Win Friends and Influence People, not just stuff about depression or whatever. We're talking about things that craft you into a better man, if that makes sense. And then also other content where it's actually educating you and teaching you something that can help you be a more functional person in society. And so, reading things that might be about history or whatever else that will help give you a better understanding, or economics, or, race relations, if that's something that you want to learn about. So you can really, I guess, kind of see between the lines of what's going on in society, why things might happen like they do, things like that. And so that's kind of what I meant by that, how that's really the only type of stuff you should read, things that help you to build, I guess, your knowledge base, whether it's with yourself, within yourself, or, outside.
I think that's great. Yeah, yeah. So what I do is I'm always reading two books. One's for like personal development, and then one's for fun. And I leave a room for the fun books because like like you said before, I'm a brain trainer, and there is a place for that for fiction, just for like building those worlds in your head. It's actually really good for brain health as well. So, even though it's not my first choice, I would read self-development books all the time. I still try to read some fiction stuff just for brain health. That's like the last thing I do before I go to bed. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm glad that you touched on that, because you are the guy, I guess, it's in the realm. So thanks for helping me with that, to kind of I guess present the way to go about it for the listeners. So yeah, thank you for that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you for. I mean, I'm glad that we're having this discussion, man. I think this is like really valuable stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we offered a whole lot of value in this discussion today, and we're starting to kind of come to a close, I guess you could say, with our time. And so there are just a few more things I wanted to ask you. And so, knowing like what the mission of the podcast is, like to help young men to develop their character, identity, and mindset in order to activate their potential and achieve their goals in life, this definitely does kind of plug into that. And so, as far as something specific to young men, things that they might struggle with when it comes to being healthy and going through the process of protecting their mental health, what are some tips that you would give them, if they don't do it already, to go ahead and start and get into that mindset?
I think we're over that stigma hump. I think every guy out there should be trying yoga. I'm a firm believer in yoga. It's You're going to get everything from it. You got the physical aspect, the mental aspect of it. You got the meditation. You got the social aspect too. You're going to meet new people in it, right?
Right.
I know. Whatever, pick a sport you play, whatever it is. I don't know what all you guys play, but I know a golfer, a skier, and a baseball player who all have said to me that they've improved in their respective sports by like 50% or something wild because they got into yoga. It's so good for injury prevention, so good just all around. I'm a huge fan. Love people, love for people to get into it. I got one that's going to come out of left field for you, but as far as um, just mental health and even preserving your relationships with people, I think it's really important for young guys to practice forgiveness. So, you know, of course, we want to practice forgiveness with ourselves, right? We're all gonna say stupid things. That's part of being human. We're all
Right.
gonna make a lot of mistakes, and that's okay, and that's how we grow. We also need to practice forgiveness with other people, because I can't tell you how many times people said stupid things to me when I was depressed, like "man up" or "oh, it could be worse," things like that, that really landed the wrong way. Um, but they they didn't understand what I was going through because they couldn't. They weren't in my shoes. So if people say stupid things to you, there's a good chance they just can't understand what's going on in your skin. So you got to
Hmm.
practice that forgiveness as well, because you're going to carry that grudge around, and it's only going to end up hurting you. So practice that forgiveness and try to practice more understanding. And I wish I had done that more when I was 20.
You know, the way I kind of, I guess, am comprehending what you're saying is that these people that were around you didn't have the ability to empathize and put themselves in your shoes. And you're saying that we should see that they had that lapse and not make the same mistake by not forgiving them. What you're saying is that we should also empathize with them and put ourselves in their shoes to see how them not knowing better can make them interact in that way and not take that personally. Am I understanding you correctly?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ah, okay, okay. I think that's great. Yeah, I think that's really great that you brought that up because people talk about it all the time, or at least people that I've been around and had these discussions with. That's something that a lot of people in general are lacking is empathy. And I think that when you start to apply that to your day-to-day interactions, it kind of makes it hard to be as cynical about the world you live in or the people around you when you put yourself in a position to try and see why they may think that way or why they may have interacted with you in that way. And I would say it kind of makes it a lot easier, a lot more, I guess, a lot more peaceful, for your mind when you kind of approach things from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. Well, other than that, that pretty much wraps it up. I think it's great what you do, and it's something that's interesting about talking to you and even relating it to my own situation and other people that I know that are kind of doing things like what we do, helping others, is that we kind of took those negative experiences that we had in our life, and instead of letting them defeat us, we kind of use that as like a purpose or like a why, I guess you can say, for how we are going to impact other people's lives. Because with you dealing with depression, you found a way to funnel that into something positive and develop a strong purpose in life that's kind of revolved around that trauma and that experience that you had earlier in your life. And then same thing with the brain health and the food and nutrition and all that, and kind of, I guess you could say, similar thing that I've done with my podcast. And so that's just interesting to me how that's kind of the way that a lot of people that do stuff that's a little bit outside the box kind of find their niche, I guess you can say.
Yeah, it is interesting how it turns out that way, but what a great thing to do, right? Spin it around and use it to help others.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And us of all people would know the impact that what we do, I guess, can have on people because we lived it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that pretty much wraps it all up. And so before we go ahead and close out the interview, is there any information that you like to give the listeners?
Actually, yeah, if anybody just wants to email me, I'm just at Zach, I spell it ZACK, Zach S. Rutledge at gmail.com, and I'll send them a free chapter of the book if they want to check it out. I'm more than happy to send them a chapter, see if they dig it.
Hey, that's great to hear. And I'll make sure to have your email as well as the link to your book on Amazon in the description. Okay.
Oh, cool. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's pretty much everything. Well, thanks for talking with me today. I really appreciate it, Zach.
Thank you so much. Like again, it was a real honor. I love what you do.
Yeah, thank you, man. All right, then. Well, take care.
Take it easy.